Hey everyone, how's it going? God Gamer here, and today I'm going to be doing a boss tier list of these 47 different bosses throughout Hollow Knight. It's going to be including all the bosses in Pantheon of Hollownest, as well as some of the other bosses which aren't included in the Pantheon. It's going to be a kind of subjective tier list. It's just going to be based off how fun I think the bosses are personally, but I'm going to kind of give some judgment on why I think that's the case. So I'm going to give some reasoning to some extent, but it's also going to be totally biased based off my experience speedrunning. If a boss wastes any time at all, I'm going to hate that boss. So just a warning in advance. But I hope you all enjoy the tier list and have fun watching. Alright, so the first boss we're going to be looking at is Absolute Radiance, which is actually the last boss in the game. So I think this boss is just an amazing boss to play against. It's an evolution of a boss which was already pretty fun in the base game, but it's been made so that it's a bit more challenging, and it's got basically an additional phase at the end. Instead of there just being a climb phase, there's like the final platform phase. And I think that just makes the fight so much more climactic, just ascending all the way to the top, and then there's that extra phase with that like special ambient music that's just like so awesome. This is an awesome boss, and it's got so many different attacks. All the phases are like unique, really great boss fight, and I love this boss. Okay, so next up is Lost Kin. Lost Kin this is also going to be a great boss. I promise. I have a lot of bosses that I don't like that much, but these two are both great bosses. So Lost Kin, it can be kind of trivialized a little bit with Descending Dark, but it's just such a pleasure to fight against this boss. The fact that it staggers so easily does make the boss easier if you're using a lot of spells, but the staggers also kind of add like a certain rhythm to the fight that makes it so much more satisfying. And the fact that there's those ads constantly spawning that you have to deal with, but that they also give you soul so that you can fight the boss with more spells, I think it's just a really cool dynamic, and the attacks that the boss has are really fun to dodge, in my opinion. So overall, Lost Kin is a really great boss fight. Okay, next up we have Brooding Mawlek, and I told you I'm not going to be rating all the bosses in the great tier. I think Brooding Mawlek is just like a whatever boss. It doesn't really do that much. It's really just basic, and the place where the boss is at the beginning of the game means that if you find Brooding Mawlek right away, then it's going to have so much health that the boss is probably not going to be killable for you. Unless you're like pretty darn good at Metroidvanias, you're going to be like, okay, I'll just come back to this boss later. And then you come back to the boss later and you just absolutely destroy it because, you know, it's not very threatening, especially after you know the mechanics of the game and know that you can basically just walk away from it at any point and heal 3 times in a row. So overall, it's just, I'm kind of confused what point this boss serves. It's kind of filler in the Pantheons as well, but there's nothing horribly bad or annoying about it. It's just, you know, there's not that much to Brooding Mawlek. Okay, so next up we have Oro Mato. This is one of the boss fights that was added in the Godmaster expansion, and I would say this is definitely a good boss fight. I wouldn't say it doesn't knock my socks off or anything, but it is fun. I like the progression of going from one of the Nail Masters to fighting 2 of them at once. It's like a really cool moment when Mato just like pops up out of nowhere and you have to fight both of them. Also in the speedrun, it's an interesting thing that you kind of have to focus on Mato a little bit more, because Mato has 1000 HP, whereas Oro only has 600. And you want to kill them both at the same time, ideally. So it's an interesting kind of thing in the speedrun that you have to deal with, and it's just a fun boss fight overall. Okay, so next up we have Crystal Guardian, and I'm going to put this in the decent tier because it's just one of those bosses that's really basic and there's not much to it, but I think it serves more of a purpose than Brooding Mawlek, so I will rate it higher because at least Crystal Guardian exists to teach you the mechanics of a tougher boss. And that is kind of a recurring theme in Hollow Knight that there will be upgraded versions of bosses, and the weaker versions are kind of simple, and they'll teach you how to deal with the more tough version of the boss, which is the case for Crystal Guardian, but it's not really the case for Brooding Mawlek. Brooding Mawlek is just kind of like, why does this guy exist? Crystal Guardian, though, it could be, I think there could be like a little bit more to the fight, but it's kind of more like a side boss than anything. And in the speedrun, it's like not even a boss, you just kind of kill it while it's still sleeping. That's been patched out in the latest patch, but it was fun to do. I definitely preferred to kill the boss while it was sleeping. I'll say that much. Okay, so next up is Dung Defender, aka Grimm, if you will. And I would say this boss is pretty solidly a good boss. It has a lot of fun attacks to deal with, like the dung balls, dodging out of the way of them. Some might find them a bit annoying, but I like the fact that you can upslash the balls in the fight and then juggle the boss as well when it turns into the ball form. It's a lot of fun to do. And the fact that you can Descending Dark the boss while it's underground to force it to unburrow, I think that's really cool too. Like, not that they need to make Descending Dark any more powerful, but the fact that you can do it and that it makes sense is just like kind of fun little thing with the boss. And of course, like thematically, the boss is really funny and cool. Love this guy. How can you not like Grimm? Okay, and now we have the polar opposite of Dung Defender. We're going from most likable boss to biggest piece of crap boss. I hate Elder Who with all my heart and soul. Okay, and this is partially my speedrunner bias, yes. But even if I weren't a speedrunner, I promise you I would still hate this boss. Because bosses that teleport outside of the arena and just like, you can't do anything about it, it's just not fun. Don't do that with your bosses. Especially when you're speedrunning and it's just like, yo, Elder Who's doing the pancake attack again. I guess I'm losing another 5 seconds. Thanks, boss. It's not cool. The boss really just isn't that fun. I do kind of like having to react to its teleports a little bit, but I mean, the fact that it just is so random, it feels bad. So I don't like this boss. It's going in the bottom tier. Okay, and now we have Enraged Guardian. So this is the actual challenging version of Crystal Guardian, and I prefer this boss a lot because you can actually die to it. And I like that. I like that there's an actual challenge involved with this boss fight, but I don't think it deserves to be like at the top of good tier. I'm going to put it at the bottom of good tier, or kind of close to the bottom, because the boss is still like really basic, and I feel like the double damage is kind of like, it's kind of like a way to force the fight to be interesting when it really wouldn't be that fun without double damage. Like, boss fight's challenging, but the attacks just aren't really that fun to deal with because they're so basic. Like, there's not that much to them, but you know, I have to rate it better than Crystal Guardian. So it's going at the bottom of good tier, in my opinion. Okay, next up we have Failed Champion. Failed Champion is actually, in my opinion, a pretty darn good boss fight. It could even be in the bottom of great, but the boss fight just has a few flaws that kind of bug me. Okay, and it's the fact that you can just equip Spell Twister and Shaman Stone and just Descending Dark the boss 4 times, and then you can Dream Nail it when it's staggered, and you can beat the boss without swinging your nail a single time. And in my opinion, that's like a little bit problematic, but if you're fighting the boss normally, mostly with your nail, I think it can be really, really fun. And the parts that I like the most about this fight are the fact that you can use the rocks that fall from the ceiling even when you're far away from the boss to deal damage to it, because the rocks actually deal 1.5 times your nail damage. And I think that's really cool, because bosses where you have to dash away from them to dodge attacks, usually it feels bad that you can't be dealing damage to the boss while you're running away from it. But with Failed Champion, you can deal damage by shooting a rock back at it whenever you're at a distance. And I think that's really cool. Other than that, I think the boss can be a little bit difficult to react to for some players because it does move really, really quickly. And I know when I was speedrunning, I definitely had troubles reacting to the boss, but the boss is fun. I do really like it, and I think it belongs at the top of good tier, maybe even close to the bottom of great tier. Okay, and next up we have the baby version of Failed Champion, False Knight. So False Knight, it's a little bit hard to judge because it's kind of like a tutorial boss almost. It's one of the first bosses that you'll fight. If not the first boss, it actually shows up like on the map even before you fill out that part of the map. So you get to the boss really, really early, and it's clearly meant to teach you, like, you know, these bosses have telegraphs. You have to dodge out of the way of these telegraphs because the telegraphs just take so long. Like, the boss winds up with its mace and it winds up for like 2 seconds before it swings, and the jumps are just crazy slow. So it's just meant to teach you about telegraphs and the fact that they exist. But is the boss fun to fight against? I wouldn't say it's fun, but it does serve its purpose, so I can't really put it in the bad tier, but yeah, we'll put it in decent tier, I suppose. Also, the fact that you can't get soul from the boss is clever because it forces you to have to actually dodge the attacks. You can't just face tank and then run away and heal up. So I think that's definitely a smart way that they designed the boss. Okay, so next up we have Flukemarm, a very infamous boss within the Hollow Knight community, and the boss sucks. It just spawns ads and sits there and does nothing, and even the ads aren't very threatening. So the boss has this design problem, in my opinion, where once you get to the point where you can one-shot the ads, like once you get enough nail upgrades, the boss completely ceases to be any threat at all. But before you get to that point, like if you don't find the Nail Master and you somehow make it to Flukemarm, the boss just feels almost impossible. And the reason is that if you have to take more than one hit to kill the ads, it's just so much more difficult. Because the ads are the only threatening thing in the fight. It just spawns ads, that's it. So, pretty lame fight, and in speedruns we just insta-kill it, either using the Descending Dark glitch, or we just shriek the boss a couple times and it dies. So, this boss isn't that great. Okay, so next up we have Galien. Galien is one of the Ghost Warriors that's, I'd say, on the more fun side for Ghost Warriors. Most Ghost Warriors aren't that interesting. They just kind of have these like really basic, like a single attack that they do that kind of like ramps up as the fight goes on, and Galien's kind of the perfect example. It just has like a bunch of bouncy projectiles that bounce around the arena, and as you lower Galien's health, more of those projectiles spawn. But the thing is that with Ghost Warriors, you tend to kill them so quickly that you don't have to learn how to dodge those projectiles, those attacks, before being able to kill them. So you can just go in with full soul, shriek a couple times, and the boss is like half dead or fully dead. And Galien is no exception to that. Overall, I think this boss is kind of fun to dodge the projectiles. It's just Ghost Warriors kind of mostly all have the same issue, that they're too easy. Okay, next up is God Tamer. So God Tamer's a bit interesting in the sense that there's 2 bosses at once, and if you kill the Tamer, it doesn't actually end the boss fight, but if you kill the beast, the boss fight ends. And a lot of people might not realize that because the beast has less health than the God Tamer. It just means that you have to focus the beast, and players might not know that. The boss fight is at the end of Coliseum 3, which makes it, feels like Team Cherry made the boss pretty simple and easy because they didn't want players to get to the end of Colo 3 and then just get killed over and over, because that wouldn't be a very fun experience. But the boss is just like a little bit too simple. So I would put this boss in the decent tier, but not very high in the decent tier because there's just not much to it. Like, the beast spits or it rolls, and the God Tamer just pretty much does that jumping attack, which is super slow and easy to dodge. So I think they made the boss like a little bit too easy just because they knew it was at the end of Hollow 3. Okay, next up we have Gorb. So Gorb is another Dream Warrior, and in the base game, Gorb actually has such a minuscule pool of health. In the speedrun, you just Shade Soul Gorb 3 times and the boss dies. So the boss fight is really just gathering enough soul before getting to the boss and then insta-killing it. In the base game, it just doesn't have enough health to really be a threat. But I do kind of like the way that the boss fight plays out. The fact that it gets these gets more waves of attacks as the fight goes on. I think the little needles that it shoots are kind of fun to dodge, but I don't think the boss is like threatening enough. And in the Pantheons, it has a bit more health, and it has that arena with the pillars, so I think that's good, but I don't think the boss is like super fun to play against. So I would put it above Galien, but I can't say that it's a good boss. I wouldn't say it's bad either, though. Okay, so next up is Nailmaster Sly, and Nailmaster Sly is a good boss fight in my opinion, but it has a few flaws that I think take it down a notch. So the fact that the boss is so mobile and like jumping around the arena, and the boss has a cool theme, all of that like makes it pretty fun. But I feel like you either have to play the fight like super passively by just like dodging every attack and swiping at the boss whenever it presents the opportunity, or by damage tanking the whole time and just using invincibility frames to like completely trivialize the boss. And that's what we do as speedrunners. We just stand in front of the boss with Quick Slash and just swing as fast as possible. And a lot of the time you get free parries, and the boss staggers, so you can heal up if you absolutely need to, or you can just like spam spells and stuff while it's zipping around to get even more damage. And I think it makes the boss a little bit too easy, so it's kind of unfortunate that the boss is vulnerable to damage tanking, but otherwise I do think Sly is a fun boss to fight against. Okay, Grey Prince Zote, everyone's favorite boss. I think a lot of people rate this boss really low, but I'm actually gonna go against that opinion, and I'd say Grey Prince Zote is actually kind of a fun boss. It's just the telegraphs for this boss are absolutely awful, and it's kind of meant to be funny in a sense, like, oh, the boss is pretending to do one thing, but all of a sudden it stops and just like dances around and hits you just by contact damage. That can be a bit frustrating, but I think that once you learn the boss's telegraphs a bit more, the boss can be more fun. And I'm at that point where the boss is more fun, but I know most other players aren't. So I totally understand if you think this boss sucks, but I put it in the good tier. I do think Grey Prince Zote is fun, especially when you're speedrunning and you have to get like right up next to the boss to land Abyss Shrieks, and that lets you deal so much more damage, and it's really satisfying and rewarding when you're able to do so. Casually, I don't know if I like the boss that much, but as a speedrunner, I do think it's fun. Okay, so next up we have Gruz Mother, or Gruz Mother. I call it Gruz Mother, some people call it Gruz Mother. I think Gruz Mother is the proper way to pronounce it. I would put this in the decent tier, but it kind of depends, because you have the Pantheon version. I think the Ascended Pantheon version is a lot more interesting just because of the spikes in the arena. Some people might find it annoying, but it actually adds a bit more complexity to the fight. Like when it's doing the bounce attacks, dodging from like platform to platform is more fun than just, you know, moving out of the way and never being at risk of taking damage, which is the original fight. The original fight is a bit too simple and easy, but it's kind of meant to teach you the game. I think they could have made Gruz Mother a bit more interesting still, so I'm gonna just put it pretty low in the decent tier. Okay, so next up we have Hive Knight. Hive Knight is actually a pretty fun boss fight. Initially, I thought this boss was kind of lame, but it's grown on me over time. I do really like the traps, like when it spawns those like spike thingies that shoot out the projectiles. I actually really like that. It's so hard to dodge, but when you do dodge it, it feels really satisfying. And I like the fact that you can interact with them to set them off early. Like if you swing your nail at those traps, then you can set them off early, and I think that's just cool that you have that option. Otherwise, the boss is like pretty fun. It's got good music, and I would put it probably in the middle of the good tier. Good boss fight. Okay, so next up we have Hornet Protector, aka Hornet 1, the first form of Hornet. I think this is a pretty good boss fight. It's the first boss fight in the game, like unless you're going toward Brooding Mawlek, that actually offers a challenge and is fun, and it's kind of dynamic with Hornet dashing around the arena, shooting out projectiles. It's a fun fight. Like, it's pretty good. I think it's well balanced, and I love doing it in the any percent NMG speedrun because it's just really satisfying to like get double hits or trap her in the corner. It's a good boss fight. Of course, once you get to the Pantheons, it's a little bit undertuned, but in the base game, Hornet 1 is a good boss fight. Okay, so next up we have Hornet Sentinel, which is Hornet 2, the more difficult version of Hornet. And for a lot of people, this is one of the most tough fights in the game. So naturally, I really like this fight. I've done speedruns with this boss, and all the speedruns just have like really satisfying fights to pull off. So I'd actually rank this above Lost Kin. And you know, the fact that you have to react to what the boss is doing so much, and the fact that it has a lot of staggers makes the pacing of the fight really fun for me. And also, like, double hitting the boss with Shade Soul in the speedruns, really satisfying. Or you can kind of use like the descending dark strats to make it a bit easier. So it has easier strats and harder strats, and it's just a really satisfying boss fight. Thematically, the boss fight's super cool too, because she's like protecting the King's brand and everything. Really cool boss. I love Hornet too. Okay, so next up we have Broken Vessel. Broken Vessel is the easier version of Lost Kin, and it's actually deceptively a little bit difficult because it moves so slowly that it's really hard to react. It kind of has the same problem as False Knight, that the telegraphs are so slow that it throws you off. So Broken Vessel, it's a kind of fun boss fight. I definitely put it in the good tier, and I put it above something like Enraged Guardian for sure. There's nothing wrong with the boss. It has kind of fun attacks to deal with, but it's definitely so slow that I feel it takes the boss down a notch. Once you get the extra speed and everything, then you have a really good boss, Lost Kin. Okay, next up we have Mantis Lords. So this is a good boss fight. I really like Mantis Lords, but I don't think it quite belongs in the great tier. So it's kind of with Failed Champion. It's a fun boss fight, but it kind of has like a bit of a flaw, in my opinion. So basically, if you go into the boss fight right after you get Mantis Claw, it's like a little bit too basic. But if you go into the boss fight later, after you've gone through City of Tears, then the boss fight can actually be way too easy, because you might have like Desolate Dive, possibly even Descending Dark, and you've got a nail upgrade, maybe 2. So it's just, depending on when you get to the boss, it can either be a bit too easy or just a bit too simple, in my opinion. But I really enjoy the boss. It's just got such a nice rhythm and pacing to it that it's a lot of fun. Okay, so next up we have Markoth. Lots of people are instantly going to place Markoth in the bottom tier, but I'm actually going to disagree. I think Markoth is the best Ghost Warrior, and the reason why I think that is because Markoth is actually more like a boss than the other Ghost Warriors. You can actually die to Markoth a lot easier than the other boss fights, and I think that's a really good thing. Like, base game Markoth still doesn't have quite enough health if you go into the fight with full resources, but I do think like in the Pantheons, especially with the Ascended Markoth arena, I think the boss is way cooler in that arena, and just like it actually offers some interesting challenge, in my opinion. So some people might find this boss frustrating, and I've certainly found it frustrating too at times, but just strategies of like having to trap the boss against a wall and kind of having to weigh whether it's appropriate to go in and attack the boss or stay at range and play a bit more safe. You actually have to make some decisions, and I like that. So I don't think the boss is great, but I think it's definitely good. Okay, next up we have Marmu. So Marmu is also kind of one of the bosses that a lot of people would put at the very bottom, and I don't think Marmu is a good boss at all, so I'm not putting him in the good tier, but I think he might belong in the decent tier. Okay, and it's because Marmu is at least a kind of unique boss fight. I don't think it's unique in a good way, but it is unique. So it just has those unique physics of like you smack it into a corner and then it bounces and hits you right back in the face. And that can be kind of fun. But the fact that it's just like not a real complete boss experience makes it like a little bit lame, in my opinion. And that's why I would put the boss kind of towards the center or lower part of the decent tier. You know, I would like a boss with Marmu's physics that just has like a couple different attacks. All right, massive boss charger. This boss is serious business, okay? It charges at you. It looks absolutely menacing. It does everything. It's just a crazy boss, bad tier. Okay, next up we have Nightmare King Grimm. So this is a lot of people's close to favorite, if not favorite boss fight, and I agree, this boss is really great. So I remember back when the Grimm Troupe, back when it came out, I remember I really struggled with this boss. It took me like 2.5 hours to beat, and keep in mind, I mean, I was speedrunning the game already for quite some time, and I was frustrated. I was like, how can you even beat this boss? I remember thinking those thoughts, but the boss is like totally consistent once you know its attack patterns, and that's something that feels really rewarding to learn each of its attacks and to be able to like punish them and also just like not get hit by them constantly, because that's also important. But the boss is just like really rewarding to learn, and something I really like about this boss as a speedrunner is the fact that you can deal damage to the boss with spells during the balloon phase. So I really like the risk versus reward aspect of dealing damage to the boss during the balloon phase and just potentially bypassing a phase by dealing enough damage. I think that's a really cool part about the boss while you're speedrunning. Okay, so next up we have No Eyes, or as I like to call it, No Fun, because the boss is not very interesting or fun to play against. So I put this boss in the bad tier, but where do we put it? Above Elder Hu, I think, because it's definitely less of a bastard, but also above Flukemarm, because Flukemarm doesn't do anything. But Massive Moss Charger is at least kind of funny. No Eyes is a pretty annoying boss to play against. The fact that there's like no progression to the fight, it's the same thing the whole time, and it has like a 20% chance when you hit it for it to teleport away. So if it just teleports away every single time you hit it, it's so aggravating. I hate it when that happens, especially during speedruns where it's just you can either insta-kill the boss or just chase it around for 20 seconds, depending on how lucky you get, how lucky the boss decides to let you be on that day. So I think No Eyes kind of sucks. That might be my bias as a speedrunner, but I certainly can't imagine thinking the boss is good. Okay, next up we have Nosk. So Nosk, back when I played casually, Nosk only had like 2 attacks, which was like running across the arena or jumping. And eventually they patched in a few more attacks for Nosk so that it was a bit more of an interesting fight. And I think they didn't go far enough. I think they could have maybe done a little bit more, because the boss at the end of the day, even on current patch, it still just kind of runs from one side of the arena to the other, and occasionally it'll do the spit attacks. But I am glad they added more, because the boss in the past, like originally, it didn't have enough. It was just like running and jumping, and that's pretty much it. It would just like deal contact damage to you. So I would say this boss is decent. I don't think it's fun even on current patch, but it is better than a lot of these bosses, so I would put it at the top of the decent tier, but it's just not that interesting in my opinion. And some of the attacks are like a bit unclear, like how you're supposed to dodge them, like the explosion attack where it explodes with the infection and shoots those orbs everywhere. I think it's a bit unclear like how you're actually supposed to dodge that. I just Descending Dark it every time and deal damage to it otherwise. Okay, next up we have Oblobbles, and Oblobbles are kind of too basic in my opinion because they only have one attack. They just do the attack, and on a timer they'll like start flying again for a little bit, and then they'll start their next attack, and that's literally all that they do. The fact that there's two of them and that the other one powers up and gets a health boost makes it like a little bit more interesting because you do want to kill them at around the same amount of health so that the other one is in the second phase for a smaller amount of time. But other than that, it's like the boss just doesn't do too much, and it's kind of designed, much like God Tamer, it's designed to be simple and easy because it's at the end of a Colosseum. So it does kind of serve that purpose, but the boss on its own just isn't that interesting, but it's not offensive or bad in any way, it's just decent. So I would put it in the decent tier, kind of right alongside God Tamer. Okay, next up is Paintmaster Sheo. This is a good boss. I do really like Paintmaster Sheo. I think it might even be a bit underrated for most people, and it's a boss that grew on me. So casually, I didn't love the boss because for me, it was a little bit difficult to remember like what each color of attack did. I was having actual difficulty remembering that, as sad as it is to say. But once I practiced the boss more and started speedrunning, it became so much more fun. And part of it is the fact that you can land Abyss Shrieks on the boss as it's jumping overhead. And you can also, there are also times where using Descending Dark is ideal. So it's a boss where you really have to react to the different situations that it puts you in. And that makes it a lot more fun for me. And it's also like a really frantic pace. It's one of those bosses where you can almost constantly be dealing damage. And as a speedrunner, that's a lot of fun for me. So this is a boss that I think belongs pretty high up in the good tier. I wouldn't place it in the great tier, but it is a fun boss. I really like it. Okay, next up we have Pure Vessel. This is my single favorite boss in the game, and it probably makes sense, again, my bias as a speedrunner, because I loved the THK fight in the base game, and then they introduced, an upgraded version of THK, the boss that I'd been practicing already for like dozens of hours for the any% NMG speedrun, and it's just an awesome boss fight. Like, the fact that you're constantly moving around, you're constantly dealing damage to the boss, and it has like so many different attacks, and the OST is amazing. It's just such a good boss fight. And I like the fact that new attacks get introduced to the fight as it goes on. Although some of the attacks, I think, that get introduced actually make the fight like a little bit easier. Like especially the attack that spawns those circles. You can just kind of Descending Dark and use iframes and hit the boss like 10 times. So that might be a little bit too easy. And same with the attack where he spawns swords in columns. That attack, you can also hit him like 10 times for that. So those attacks are a little bit imbalanced in that you can deal so much damage to the boss, which can feel rewarding at the same time. But I think those attacks should be a little bit more difficult to punish, but it's an awesome boss. I really, really like Pure Vessel. Okay, next up we have Sisters of Battle. This is a really awesome fight. It has one of the best OSTs in the game, in my opinion. And it has such a fun pace to the fight. And I think you'll find that most of the bosses that I've ranked higher up are bosses that you can just be fighting constantly. So these bosses just have a much better pacing to them, where you're constantly having to dodge out of the way and deal damage to them like at the same time. And in my opinion, that makes boss fights just like so much more fun. Bosses where you kind of have to dodge out of the way and then stand there and just like wait, I think that's a lot less interesting. But Sisters of Battle is like the exact opposite because you're constantly doing something, and that makes the fight so much more fun. And like I said, the OST is really sick. Love this fight. Okay, next up we have Soul Master. So this one's Soul Master and this one's Soul Tyrant because these are the images on the wiki. So Soul Master is a fight that I found actually pretty fun. It's a pretty tense fight because it's so far from the bench. Like, you do unlock some shortcuts, but you have to go all the way through Soul Sanctum to get to the boss. I think it's a really fun boss, and the fact that there's like the second phase where it just breaks the floor underneath you and you don't know what's going to happen, and all of a sudden it starts like teleporting and smashing into the ground. I think that's like such a fun part of the fight. But even the first part of the fight is also pretty fun. I think that as a speedrunner, I dislike the fight, but as a casual player, I do like the fight a lot. Because when you're speedrunning the fight, any boss that like teleports away from you is a bit annoying because whenever it teleports away from an attack, it's time loss, and just having no control when the boss is teleporting away from you constantly, it's not very fun. But casually, I'd rate this boss pretty high, and because I have good memories of it in my casual playthrough, I would put this like in the center of good tier personally. Maybe towards, yeah, a bit more towards the upper part of good tier. Okay, next up we have Soul Tyrant. So Soul Tyrant is kind of the same thing as Soul Master. It's just like a harder, faster version, which I think makes it more fun. But it has the same issue with Soul Master, which is that if you're speedrunning, you don't like the teleports, but casually, I do find the boss pretty fun. And the fact that everything is just like faster, more frantic, it's got a better pacing to the fight, but the fight itself is like super similar. So I think that I rate the fight similarly, but I would put this a little bit higher just because I prefer the higher difficulty of the boss. If we can put it there, thank you. There we go. Okay, so next up we have the Soul Warrior. Would you call this a boss? I probably wouldn't call it a boss because it's more like a mini boss, but it does show up in the pantheons, so in that sense I guess it's a boss. Now if I'm rating it amongst the bosses, it's got to be pretty low, so it does serve the purpose as being like a filler boss in the pantheons, and it's kind of like an interesting mini boss experience in Soul Sanctum, but I don't think the boss is very fun. I think I'd put it like probably above Marmu because Marmu's a bit annoying. This boss isn't really annoying, but it's kind of similar in being like super basic. So I would put it at the bottom of the decent tier. It's not bad, it's not really a boss. It doesn't really do that much. Okay, next up we have the Collector. Now this one is a little bit difficult to rate because the boss itself doesn't really do that much, but it does spawn a lot of enemies who will annoy the heck out of you. It's smart that they didn't let you collect soul from the Collector, because if you did, you would just be able to destroy all the ads with spells. But as it is, even with the way the fight is currently, you still kind of use spells against the ads, like a lot. So if you land Dream Nails on the Collector, the fight becomes a whole lot easier. But if you don't, then the fight can be a bit more challenging. And I think it does kind of pose an interesting challenge compared to the other fights. Like, it's certainly a unique fight because of how, like, you're forced to deal with the ads, but you can't hit the boss for soul to deal with the ads. So it's kind of interesting in that sense. But that said, I don't really find the fight fun, so I can't put it in the good tier personally. Like, I don't find it that fun to deal with the boss. It's kind of awkward with the way that the Collector hops around, and I just don't find the focus on the ads to be that enjoyable. So I would put it in the decent tier. It's still got like an interesting challenge, but it's just not that enjoyable for me. Okay, so now we have THK, the Hollow Knight. So I love this boss. I really, really enjoy the boss because in the speedrun, It's so much fun. Like in the any percent NMG speedrun, fighting against the boss is like such a pleasure. And the reason why that's the case is because we just have Vengeful Spirit and Shaman Stone, and that's it. And with that loadout, the boss fight is like so rewarding because of the double hits, because it just has like a good pace to the fight. You go through the phases every 20 seconds or so. It's a good fight, but most of the time you get to THK with like Descending Dark, Max Nail Upgrade, Abyss Shriek, Shade Soul, and that just makes the fight so easy in comparison. On current patch, they kind of buffed the fight a little bit, so the boss is faster. I think they made the boss a bit too fast, even, so it's a bit difficult in that sense. I don't think they made the fight difficult in the right ways with the current patch buffs. I think they could have buffed its health a bit more and just like kept the double damage, but maybe not make it faster. But that said, like I have a special place in my heart for this boss because of how fun it is for me in the speedrun. So I would actually put this boss right next to Pure Vessel because I know that Pure Vessel is a better boss, but I just have so many good memories. I've spent like dozens of hours playing against THK. It's such a fun boss fight. The fact that you deal damage to it constantly, you have punishes for like every attack, it's just so much fun. Love THK. Okay, now we've got Traitor Lord. Traitor Lord is actually a pretty alright boss. Now, it's much like Nosk in that they patched it so that there's more attacks, but the boss still felt pretty basic even afterward. And also, it doesn't really do its additional attacks that much, so it's still like 90% of the time either doing a dash attack or a dive attack. So Traitor Lord is still kind of a basic boss, but the fact that it does double damage makes it like a bit more threatening. So it kind of has a challenge to it, but I wouldn't say the boss is that fun. I might put it like at the bottom of the good tier, maybe above Enraged Guardian, because I think it's more fun than Enraged Guardian, but it's not that interesting of a fight. So maybe it's a bit generous, but you know, the bottom of the good tier isn't like great bosses. It's just bosses that are, you know, like maybe a step above decent. And I would say Traitor Lord's probably a step above decent. Okay, now we have Troupe Master Grimm. So this is the more basic, easier version of Nightmare King Grimm, which by default makes it a good fight, I would say. But it's kind of missing the challenge that Nightmare King Grimm offers. I remember my casual playthrough, I just kind of face tanked Grimm and won the fight, and I posted it on YouTube, and I looked awful because I was just face tanking, and people in my comments were like laughing at me, and I don't blame them because I had no mastery of the fight whatsoever. But it was like a fun fight. It wasn't bad, but it doesn't force you to learn the fight, and that's kind of a problem in my opinion. The boss is also at the same time meant to teach you the mechanics so that Nightmare King Grimm doesn't like totally overwhelm you. So the boss definitely serves that purpose, and I would say it's a good boss fight in that sense. I would put it like right here, right below Nightmare King Grimm. All right, Uumuu, easiest bad tier of my life. So is it worse or is it better than Massive Moss Charger? It is worse. And again, this is my speedrunning bias, but Uumuu is a piece of crap. So I hate this boss in the speedrun because, of course, it can randomly do slower attacks and lose you multiple seconds for no reason whatsoever. It can also just put itself in awkward situations where it's super difficult for you to get the quick cycle, and it's just not fun at all to go up against. It's the boss that single-handedly takes the any percent NMG speedrun down a notch. And you do have to learn a lot. I think that it doesn't ruin the speedrun, and I think that it does feel rewarding in some ways. It definitely rewards you for your experience, but it's also like disproportionately punishing for tiny mistakes. So like you can miss an attack by like a couple frames and it just ruins your whole speedrun. And that feels awful. So screw this boss, man. Also casually, it's like not remotely interesting. I think that in the Pantheon versions, they added like an interesting twist to the fight, but like at the end of the day, it still just does like 2 different attacks, and most of the time you just stand there and don't get hit by them. So I don't think it's a good boss, so it's going in the bad tier. Okay, now we have a Vengefly King. So this is another boss, quote unquote, that was added into the Pantheon. So it's kind of just like filler, because I guess they wanted to pad the Pantheons a little bit so that they're like a bit more meaty. But Vengefly King is not the way to do it. Vengefly King, it's kind of boring, and you know, it's really a frustrating boss in speedruns because you want to get a really specific pattern out of the boss to deal as much damage as possible, and just that's not fun because you're resetting so many of your runs to this bastard boss. And casually, it's not a fun boss either because it's just like awkward. Because of the flying AI, it just like flies away from you and into the side of the screen where it's hard to reach. So it's just awkward. It's not fun. I would say this boss is actually kind of bad. So this boss is going in the bad tier. If you call it a boss, I think it's just like a mini boss, but whatever, we'll rate it. All right, now we've got Watcher Knights. Okay, so Watcher Knights is a pretty tough boss for most people to face because it's one of those bosses where you're dealing with multiple enemies at once, and that can be really challenging. That said, the boss has grown on me so much from doing the speedrun. It's the same thing as THK, where I just practice the boss so much, and it's just the speedrun strategies against Watcher Knights are so much fun to pull off, like getting triple hits, just like dealing damage to both of them at once, and just doing everything really quickly. It feels so rewarding. So I would actually put this boss in the great tier. I know like casual players who don't speedrun, and even a lot of speedrunners probably wouldn't agree with me. Even in the speedrun, they can be pretty RNG, but they're just really satisfying to play against. In the casual playthrough, I think they're way too easy with Descending Dark and kind of hard without it. And Shade Soul can also kind of trivialize them if you use it well enough. But I just like the boss personally, so I'm putting it in the great tier because, you know, it's my tier list. Okay, next up we have White Defender. White Defender is a pretty fun boss. You know, it's Ogrim. Ogrim has a great, fun personality, and I like the fact that you're dealing with dung balls the whole time. They're just getting shot everywhere, and you can upslash them to get rid of them, and that's just kind of fun to me. Now, White Defenders, some of his attacks are like a bit difficult to deal with, but it's rewarding to like dodge out of the way of them and just get right back on the boss and continue dealing damage. So I really enjoy this boss. It's got a nice pacing to it. I like how when you go into the second phase, you have to change up the way that you punish the boss, like when it's coming out of the ground each time. And you can't cheese the boss like with Dung Defender by just using Descending Dark. So I think this is a really good boss fight, but I don't think I'd necessarily put it into the great, like top tier, but it's a good boss fight. I really like it. Okay, now we've got Winged Nosk. So this is the inclusion in Pantheons that probably left the most people confused. It's not really Nosk at all. It's actually just Vengefly King with some Nosk features, which actually works out a little bit better than one might expect. I think it's kind of a fun boss fight, but it also suffers from the flying AI in Hollow Knight just generally not being that fun to deal with. Because flying AI, when it's far away from you, they kind of move in, and when they're close to you, they move away. So because of the way that the room is, often the boss will be so far away from the center platform that you can't like easily jump up and just like attack them because they'll be like way off in the corner of the screen. So I don't really like that. I kind of wish the boss was like around the center platform a little bit more, but some of the attacks are like pretty fun to deal with, I think. But it's not a great boss overall just because it's kind of like a reskinned Vengefly King. So I can't really put it above the decent tier, but I don't think it's a bad boss necessarily. Just they could have pulled it off a bit better, I think. Okay, so next up we have Xero. Xero is a total pushover with its basic version in the base game, but in the Hall of Gods, Xero is a little bit better. I really like its Ascended arena, actually, and I like the fact that you can pogo the swords that Xero spawns. It's just something cool to kind of avoid falling into the bottom of the screen. It almost never comes into play, but it is potentially something cool that you can do. I like Xero a little bit more than most of the other Ghost Warriors. I do like the sword attack and just like dodging out of the way. It's kind of satisfying to do, but just because it's such a pushover for the most part, I'm not like a huge fan of the boss, but I'd put it at the top of the decent tier. And let's rate Zote. So this is the Zote at the end of Coliseum 1, because we've already rated Grey Prince Zote. So definitely Coliseum 1 Zote. And yeah, this boss has no attacks, or does it have the running attack? I actually can't remember because I've never waited long enough for him to do an attack. But you know, he's not annoying like these other bosses. So do we put him in the bad tier or do we put him in the decent tier? I mean, I feel bad putting Zote in the bad tier, so you know, technically I might put him here because he's less annoying than these horrible bosses, but maybe we'll put him in the decent tier just to be nice to poor Zote. You don't want to make him cry. But yeah, I hope you all enjoyed watching me make this tier list. It was definitely fun to make. Of course, it's totally subjective, and even now I might consider making some changes to it because I'm just kind of ranking things on the fly. So if I could edit it now, I might make some changes. Not too sure what I'd make. Maybe lowering the collector a little bit, perhaps, now that I'm looking at it. But yeah, it's just totally like a subjective tier list just for fun. So, and I hope it included all the bosses. I'm not completely sure, but I think it included most, if not all of them. But yeah, hope you all enjoyed watching the video. Thanks so much for watching, and have yourselves a wonderful day.